Chapter 29 to 30. New York was a place Harry liked to visit through the Sanctum Sanctorum branch here, so Harry knew a thing or two about the area before leaving the airport. Camartage also had some masters who left the sanctum living there who occasionally shared their homes with guests. Harry asked first and got permission from one of them to use his address as a temporary place of residence. On paper anyways. The immigration's office wouldn't just let someone come over without evidence they had a place to stay. There were other things Harry could have done, of course, but that would have brought attention to his vast wealth, so he now had a place of residence he would only visit to give a thank you gift later. Now Harry just had to figure out how to apply for a place that only sends invites. According to the Ancient One, Charles Xavier was a telepath and had a machine which amplified the range of his clairvoyance. Clairvoyance itself was a psionic skill that fell under both telepathy and astral creation, but it was also something that didn't work on Harry along with precognition. Harry was rendered invisible to any paranatural means that allowed farsight or future viewing. This of course meant Xavier had no idea he existed, even though Harry was in fact a very powerful mutant. The Ancient One stated that Xavier's machine allowed him to use the astral plane to visit nearly any location on Earth, though he would only be able to sense the minds at those locations, not the content of the location, unless he borrowed the senses of those he visited. She never approached him but did observe his passing a few times through the astral plane, though he did not notice her. That is how she learned of him in the first place. There were 3 approaches he could think of for first contact. 1. He could catch a cab to the school and knock on the front door. 2. He could call ahead and ask for an appointment or meeting. 3. He could make a scene and have them come to him. Maybe he could do all 3. Walk up to the institute, yell profanities, and when they came out he could overcharge his flesh with energy and violently explode in front of everyone. Nah, pranks like that couldn't be pulled on the first day. First week, on the other hand. Harry had already decided to tell others his mutant power allowed him to temporarily increase his stats when he absorbed metals, heal when he absorbed food, and allowed him to memorize the contents of books for a few days when he absorbed a book. Although it would limit him, it was the safest option for the long term, and he decided that under no circumstance should he show off his magic. Ping. New quest, get drafted with style, go to the marked location and display abilities. Will become visible to nearby clairvoyant, Charles Xavier. Display use of magic and psionics to X-Men who arrive to meet you, get recruited into the X-Men. Harry sighed and thought to himself, so much for that plan. After getting the quest pop up, Harry went over to a nearby hotel lobby and asked permission to use the phone to make a local call, which they allowed. He went over the phone and removed the hack box from his backpack and plugged the lobby phone's cord into it and made a call. Hello Harry, I wasn't expecting a call so soon. The Ancient One seemed more than a little amused. Yeah, laugh it up. I got a quest to show off my magic and psionics and wanted your opinion. I see. We've discussed this before, but in all likelihood, your quests are generated by the power of the Living Tribunal. There has yet to be a quest with negative consequences for completing it. Yeah, only negative consequences for failing it. You think there might be a reason I need to show off my skills in the future? From previous experience, that does seem more likely than less likely. However, did the quest say to show off your magic and psionics, or your full range of abilities? It said, display use of magic and psionics to X-Men who arrive to meet you. So the former. Interesting. If I had to guess, a choice Charles Xavier will make in the future will be different depending on his knowledge, or lack of knowledge of the existence of magic or your psionic talents. Possibly both. If it is the power of the Living Tribunal that suggests informing him now, I would recommend doing so. Therefore, it would be prudent to ensure he knows at least most of what you are capable of. However, I do have a suggestion for how to keep with the original plan while displaying magic and psionics. Please impart your wisdom to this lesser being, O great Ancient One. For that alone I should hang up on you and allow you the chance to grow by solving your own problems. That is cruel and unusual, and you know it as well as I. Indeed. Very well. Several of the companies you own that make jewelry use synthetic gemstones, correct? Yeah. Turns out the magic properties of some gems are even better when synthetic because they can be made 100% pure. Use them with the right symbols and talismans in jewelry and they can work as weak protection amulets even without a magic user charging them. Excellent, here is the plan. Harry had to cast a few discreet low-power wizard spells during the call to prevent people from telling him to get lost after the call reached a half-hour in length. Nothing nearby seemed affected, though the phone may need to be replaced later. Thankfully it didn't seem like anyone really needed it, as the lobby had a second phone line across the hall. The Ancient One's plan was basically to get some large gemstones and have Harry claim the ability to use certain energies when certain gemstones were absorbed. Like the ability to use strength energy spells after absorbing a ruby, use dimensional energy spells after absorbing a diamond, etc. He would also display his ability to sense energy. This however meant he would have to walk around with giant rubies and diamonds, which was kinda tacky. He'd had to make them big too, so people didn't think it could use magic with tiny ones, about the size of an egg would do. First he would need to reorganize a few things to make sure he had a visible means of acquiring such gems, which meant he had to contact the goblins. However, one considered a few things, he decided this might be an opportunity. At the moment, there wasn't any big company that made large amounts of synthetic gems of large size because there wasn't a need or market for one. However, gemstones had far more uses than just jewelry. There were hundreds of uses for various gemstones in engineering, and they only used synthetic stones. Harry however knew thousands of applications for gemstones. He had analyzed the Mandarin's alien tech and the Doctor's future tech. He knew that there was more to electronics and technology than copper, iron, and silicon. Almost all technology relied on properties of electromagnetic energy, whether it be electricity, radio waves, or even colored light. However, Harry knew about other forms of energy and knew the means to harness them. He knew properties of gemstones and certain materials that no one else on Earth knew about. Harry decided his first move into the direction of tech he was considering was to create a large company that mass-produced synthetic gemstones of various shapes and sizes. Most of these would have commercial engineering applications and sold at the proper price, but the point was to find and get settled into a niche. Harry knew both mundane and magical ways to create gemstones, and so did the goblins. After getting out a stack of papers and his portkey box from his inventory, Harry wrote down his intentions and plans for the future. Once the company had visible mundane means to create large amounts of synthetic gemstones, Harry would introduce the goblins to the concept of the sonic screwdriver. Harry certainly couldn't build one at the moment, but he could create a massive machine that could do a few things a sonic screwdriver could do, like alter the properties of some materials without magic. Harry knew that some technologies required materials with properties that simply didn't exist yet. However, if he used an imitation sonic screwdriver, even if it could only affect gemstones, Harry could alter the properties of some gemstones to get materials which had the properties needed to create highly advanced technology. And that was just the long-term benefit. By saturating the market with synthetic gemstones, those who measure their wealth in gemstones will find themselves poorer, while those who don't measure their wealth in gemstones will be richer by comparison. Thus was business. Ping. Business path has risen to rank 17. Harry smiled at the pop-up. That was a good sign. In order to prepare his dastardly plan for the X-Men, Harry used magic to create 3 chicken egg-sized gemstones of 4 different types and put each in a pouch Harry strapped to his belt. He used a Notice Me Not spell on the pouches so a pickpocket with a knife wouldn't pay enough attention to them to swipe for now. He wouldn't use it later though, since that was a great weakness to have. The point of this charade was to demonstrate his magic and other abilities in a way that would allow people to believe Harry could be beaten in the right circumstances. In this case, deprive Harry of his gemstones. People were less likely to try to kill a person if they thought they could beat or control that person, but someone could only be beaten or controlled if they had a weakness to exploit. Harry wondered when the men in black suits would visit him and deprive him of his source of power and threaten him. He figured he should start writing a list of pranks now to use on the unfortunate souls who tried it first. Once finished, Harry caught a cab to North Salem, which was where Xavier's institute was located. However, the map pointer was pointing to another area of North Salem, not the institute. When the cabbie realized the area they were heading, he declined going further and asked if he could drive around. It seemed that strange things went on in that neighborhood. Harry said it was all right and got out and paid the man with a nice tip. The street he walked through was somewhat checkered. Several locations on the street seemed to be freshly made while other locations were old. Several of the various houses or storefronts had windows with cracks while others' windows looked brand new. There were few if any buildings that didn't seem half old and half new. In other words, this street saw a lot of damage at one time or another. What stood out the most though was the lack of people walking around. It didn't take long for Harry to reach the map marker, so he just started wandering around. "Hey, haven't seen your face around here before." A young man looking about a year older than Harry shouted from an alleyway while approaching Harry. He looked tall for his age with a shoulder-length unkempt mess of brown hair. Harry said, "Well, I'm new in the area. Just arrived actually. The name's Harry. British? Never met a Brit before," he remarked. Harry could have dropped his accent but decided not to. It was a part of him and anyone who didn't like him for it could bugger off. The teen said, "Well, I'm Lance. And this is John," he said, motioning to another teen with blonde hair that stood straight up. The newcomer approached Harry opposite Lance's approach and were effectively surrounding him. Harry appeared oblivious to them. "Nice to meet you, Lance and John. Know anything fun to do around here?" The blonde chuckled, "Yeah, there's an arcade a few blocks down." "Ah, that's right, I used up all my quarters doing laundry for the homeless." "You got any cash on you?" Harry said, "Perhaps, perhaps not. If I told you I only had British pounds in my wallet, would you believe me?" Lance grinned and said, "You don't seem to understand the situation here, you scrawny little Briton. We're members of the Brotherhood and we own this town. Unless you give us everything you got on you, you ain't returning to jolly ol' England." Harry cracked his knuckles. And who said Americans didn't know how to have fun? Come on them. The pair glanced at each other for a full second before they broke down laughing. John pulled out a lighter and said, "I think we should have a reenactment of the Great London Fire. What do you think?" Harry was getting tired of these guys, so he threw himself forward and smashed his fist into Lance's still laughing face. The force of the blow threw Lance's whole body back, which spun 3 times before crashing into the side a garbage can on the other end of the street. John nearly dropped his lighter in shock. Harry didn't bother using the opening and said, "All talk after all. So much for the colonies." John was successfully enraged from the insult and flicked the lighter to cause a spark. Harry felt a rush of psionic energy fill the flame, which mixed into the air and grew large and larger. Harry sighed and thought to himself, "Of course he's a pyrokinetic." Harry ducked under the oncoming flame rushing at him and made it to the street. The blonde shouted, "You're gonna burn for that." He agitated the flames to make them larger and larger, and Harry just stood there. Harry reached into 2 of his pouches, one had smoky quartz and one had zircon. He said, "You got a nice trick there. Let me show you a few of my own." Harry cast a Lumos spell within the egg-sized orb of smoky quartz, which shined brightly in his hand, and then he took it back into his inventory, making it vanish. He said, "Hit me with your best shot." John didn't need any more encouragement and threw a large ball of flames at Harry just as Harry cast a flame freezing charm using a massive amount of power. Several of the lamp posts exploded as Harry wasn't suppressing his exotic energy and was actively casting very powerful wizard magic. However, the building behind him seemed to be abandoned, so there wasn't anyone inside or any electronics close enough to get fried besides those lamp posts. The fire heavily impacted Harry like a massive ocean wave crashing down on him, but he withstood it using a proper stance, and when the fire scattered, nothing had burned. One downside of psionics-based pyrokinesis was that the fire they controlled was just fire. Unlike magic fire used by magic-based pyrokinetics, psionic-based fire control had no means to prevent itself from being extinguished by normal fire extinguishing means, and it had no resistance to magic. So each had their ups and downs. John looked at Harry in absolute shock. He was also surprised that not only had his fireball not burned anything, it had actually gone out. The reason it went out was that the flame freezing charm prevented it from burning anything, even air, so it went out without anything else to burn. That trick doesn't work when it is burning wood, but air is different. Harry then lifted his other hand, which contained the lump-sized zircon, and cast another Lumos charm inside it. "Are you ready for my next trick?" The shining zircon vanished into Harry's inventory, and golden chains erupted from the ground and bound themselves around the pyrokinetic and dragged him to the ground. The shaggy brunette from before was still out cold, which wasn't surprising for one of Harry's punches. Harry took a look at them both and had a nasty idea. He reached into his pocket where he actually drew from his inventory a Sharpie. He then walked over to John, who was shouting profanities at him, and said, "You know, if you want to act like the villain, you really should look the part." Harry then bent down and drew a villain mustache on the bound teen, which caused another string of profanities, half of which Harry didn't even recognize, to run out of his mouth. Harry thought it was odd the man had a vaguely Australian accent when swearing. Harry walked over to Lance and drew a matching mustache on him as well, and said to the one who was still conscious, "You need to cool down a little or you'll burn yourself out. Have a nice day." The quest display showed a check mark on the first item. Xavier probably saw him and would be sending his X-Men to scout Harry in a bit. The map marker showed another area Harry ran off to as he wanted to set up a few things for this confrontation. The location the map marker led him to was at the edge of an empty, trash-filled park and an abandoned construction site where some materials had been left around. Something about it seemed stereotypical, but it was as good a place as any for a meeting. A few minutes after he started waiting, Harry felt a tug and warming sensation from a certain direction. It was the phoenix flames gifted to him. trying to lead him somewhere. Though that seemed pointless as where it seemed to want him was moving closer. Harry was more than a little surprised that the one the Phoenix told him about was not only here, but on her way. He wondered if that was why the quest not only wanted him to show his magic but psionics. The 4 types of gems Harry had in his prepared pouches were smoky quartz, zircon, quartz, and emerald. According to his cover, those types of gems could be absorbed to use wizard magic, binding magic, psionics, and illusion magic respectively. Any other type like dimensional energy and such would be overkill for most, as the eldritch magics powered by dimensional energy had been honed and sharpened in combat for tens of thousands of years. A black van with a red X within a red circle on the side drove up to the construction site and parked once they had a visual on Harry. A shorter than average man of indeterminable age and a gruff exterior exited the driver's seat and stood next to the door without approaching. The van's side doors slid open and from one side came a teen with red sunglasses Harry sensed formidable power behind, and from the other side a fair beauty with shoulder-length red hair his gifted flame was excited to see. Their gazes locked and green eyes met green eyes. She turned away a moment later with a slightly self-conscious blush. From the passenger side of the van emerged a young woman who, like the other, only stood next to the door. The sunglasses-wearing teen and the redhead walked over to where Harry was sitting on a large piece of metal and watching. "Hi there, I'm Scott, and this is Jean. Were you the one who got in a fight with some of the Brotherhood earlier?" Harry smiled. Who doesn't like a little comical misunderstanding? Harry had been living with monks for the last 3 years and hadn't had a good target for a prank in far too long. He placed the metal he was sitting on in his inventory, which made it vanish before everyone's eyes as he got up and said, "Ah, I see, you must be a friend of theirs." "What?" "No dash." Harry dashed forward to nail Scott in the stomach, but the teen shifted his weight and turned to dispel most of the force of the blow. He seemed to instinctively move to take his sunglasses off, which caused Harry to jump back before a surge of red energy erupted from his eye sockets that threatened to gouge out the sky. Jean shouted placatively, "No wait, we're just here to talk." Harry said, "Americans must have the most interesting conversations, since those who talk can either make great big fireballs or shoot lasers from their eyes. Of course, if that's how Americans choose to converse, I'm happy to reciprocate." Harry took out a large emerald from his pouch and took a moment to look at it before saying, "It matches your lovely eyes red," which had her turn away from him. Scott had closed his eyes and was taking what appeared to be a visor from his pocket and putting it on. Harry once more cast Lumos within the gem, causing it to shine brightly before he placed it into his inventory while closing his fist for effect. Harry only had 2 illusion spells he could cast, and the cover he was using would only allow him to use 1 spell per gem. Harry cast Independent Doppelganger, which made 4 Harry Potters appear and start running around in accordance to Harry's will. 2 of the illusions rushed Jean while Harry and the other rushed Scott. Jean pressed her hands forward at the illusions coming at her, and Scott's visor released a thin red beam at the doppelgangers, which passed harmlessly through them. Had he started on the ones coming at him, he would have hit Harry first, but instead he shot through the ones coming at Jean first with a sweeping motion. Harry accelerated before the beam reached him and delivered another gut blow, but this time he centered it, not allowing Scott to throw off the force. Jean released a field of psionic force which locked onto Harry and lifted him into the air. Harry smiled at her and pulled out a large piece of quartz from his pouch, which started shining brightly in his hand before it vanished into his inventory. Harry then thought up what the Phoenix looked like in all its glory and concentrated on the image before locking in on Jean's mind and sending her the image. Jean's focus on telekinesis was completely disrupted by the intense and vivid image sent through telepathy, and the breaking of her concentration caused her a headache which made her groan slightly. Harry safely dropped from the air and Scott noticed Jean get attacked and shouted, "Jean," before turning to Harry and releasing a high-volume blast of red energy. That passed harmlessly through him. The Real Harry switched for an illusion the moment he hit the ground, and Scott had been too distracted to notice it. Harry had moved behind Jean, who was still rubbing her head. A part of her wanted to get the image out of her head so she could focus on the fight, but another part wouldn't let her ignore it. Scott couldn't recklessly fire his optics blast when Harry was behind Jean, so he would only watch Harry pull out another gem, zircon this time. He noticed it was different than the previous 2 gems he pulled out, but recognized the pattern and tried to shoot a pinpoint optics blast to shatter it. Harry ducked partially behind Jean, and the zircon glowed with the cast Lumos spell before vanishing once more. Golden chains shot from the ground, and just like with John, Scott was completely bound by them before he could react. Harry casually walked over to the van and said, "That was fun. Do you want to talk?" The gruff man said, "Nah, I'm not much of a talker. Fighting though. How about a little one-on-one?" Harry smiled and took out another emerald from his pouch and it glowed once more. The gruff man said, "That's ain't gonna work on me, brat," and rushed at Harry, the real one. Harry figured he somehow could tell the difference, so he dispelled them and moved to fight. He struck his side, but those ribs reminded him of Chiantang's, and when Harry blocked the man's counter it made his own bones ache. Harry had long since figured that although stats were not always clear-cut, they were usually straightforward. An average adult human had 10 of each stat. However, an average adult man struggles with the newspaper's crossword and doesn't bother memorizing anything not related to his job or life. An average adult human can also deadlift about 100 pounds. If that was broken down, then each point in STR was 10 additional pounds that could be deadlifted. Harry once heard that the world record for the deadlift was over 1,000 pounds, meaning a normal human could in fact reach STR stat of 100. From the force of his blows, Harry figured this guy had a STR of at least 200. His own was higher at 275, but neither of them were going all out. That was just Harry's estimate for his max. Moreover, this guy's bones had zero give, and unless he was mistaken, the short man was at least 4 times heavier than Harry was. The amount they held back lessened and lessened as blows were exchanged or dodged at faster speeds with heavier strikes. Harry wasn't nearly as sturdy, but he didn't bruise and injuries recovered quickly, which his opponent took notice of. Harry was shocked to find that this guy's combat standard was close to, if not in the same realm as the Mandarin, and even if Harry's strength and speed were a fraction higher, Harry was only keeping up because of how easy the man was going on him. Harry rushed back while taking out his last zircon and making it glow. His opponent took a stance, and though he was bound in golden chains a moment later, he was not taken to the ground. He smirked at Harry, and with the sound of metal against metal, 3 shining claw-like blades erupted from between the man's knuckles. He swung up his arm and the nearly indestructible chain was cleanly sliced through. Harry frowned. Metal claws? I should have brought a diamond or a ruby. Well, live and learn. Before the fight could continue, Harry felt Scott's energy build up, so Harry jumped away to dodge the sneak attack. Since Harry was using each gemstone to cast a single spell, he wasn't maintaining them, so the chains binding Scott had faded, giving the teen what he thought was an opening to strike. Harry's opponent snarled, "Scott, what do you think you're doing? I said this is a one-on-one fight, dot. But Logan, he hurt dash." The redhead said, "I'm fine, Scott, he didn't hurt me at all." She had recovered and was watching Harry's fight. Harry felt her mental probes and allowed her to scan his surface thoughts. She already determined Harry was just sparring. It seems Scott was the only one who thought the fight was serious. Harry turned to the visor-wearing mutant and flatly said, "You came here to talk. Words are cheap, so I wanted to have a different type of conversation, and you've said more than enough. Someone willing to shoot another man in the back isn't the type of person I want to have further conversations with." He turned to Jean and said, "It was a pleasure to meet you." And he turned to the warrior and said, "It has been an honor to fight someone at your level. I'd like to continue, but I'm just about out of gems." Harry flattened the pouch he took the last zircon from to show it was in fact empty. Harry then took out a smoky quartz, and before anyone could react it glowed and vanished. Harry said, "It is a shame, but my trip to the States seems to have been a waste." He glared slightly at Scott for a moment before apparating away, vanishing before them all. Or at least that's what it looked like he did. Harry apparat to the highest point of the construction site and shifted into his snowy owl form. Just to be safe, he also cast a few spells to completely suppress his presence. From his new vantage point he saw a large raven perched on the top of one of the nearby trees, who seemed to have watched the whole thing and was paying close attention to the X-Men. Harry also saw someone further down the street, a teen with white hair. The man, apparently called Logan, growled out in a tone laced with sarcasm, "Way to go, Cyclops. The future leader of the X-Men just showed a potential ally, exactly the type of person he would be following if he joined up with us. Nice job displaying the virtues and values Charles took all that effort into shoving into your thick skull." But Jean dash. "Quiet," he shouted. He then looked over to the redhead and asked, "What did he actually do?" "He sent a really detailed image into my head of a giant flaming bird. A phoenix maybe? It looked so real. It broke my concentration, which gave me a bit of a headache, but that's it." Logan asked, "He's a telepath?" "I don't know. When he sent the image into my mind, he seemed to be a telepath. But while you were fighting, his mind didn't have any trace of telepathy." Harry inwardly smirked. Telepaths have natural, passive defenses against mental intrusion. Harry simply withdrew them all and let her see his mind. However, she saw only what his occlumency allowed her to see. Logan said, so a telepath but not a telepath. Everyone noticed him using those crystals, right? And didn't he make that metal piece he was sitting on vanish too? Scott seemed to try and be helpful by adding, yeah, I'm not sure about the metal, but he definitely pulled one of those crystals each time he did something. When I tried to shoot one, he moved it out of the way. The woman who was still standing next to the van said, so what? He absorbed those crystals for power. Logan shook his head, he wasn't weak even without them. Pixie Kid was actually stronger and faster than me. He also has experience. Not practice, but actual life and death combat experience, and a lot of it. I think he might have had a healing factor too. Logan narrowed his eyes and looked at Scott, he was testing us. Not much of a point joining with someone weaker than you. He turned and headed into the van, back to the institute. Let's see if Charles can track the kid down. Harry himself never planned on turning down their invitation, he was just playing hard to get. The fact that the quest hadn't failed proved that. Once the van drove off, the white-haired teen sped over to the area faster than a blur. A moment later the raven on the treetop flew down and transformed into a blue-skinned woman with blood-red hair. Now Harry was interested. The white-haired teen gave the area a look over before asking in a rapid voice, was that the guy Mystique? How strong was he? The blue-skinned woman answered smoothly, for someone who looked no older than yourself, very. I did not believe Pyro and Avalanche at first, but it seems they were not lying after all. Heard that, couldn't see much though without the ex-nobody spotting me. What do you think? He seemed to use tools but fought Wolverine well enough without them. The fact that Xavier sent his children implies this new arrival is one of us. It seems the Boy Scouts' temper has certainly worked in our advantage this time. Look around Pietro. Very few teleportation abilities can take someone very far. If he is nearby I want him found. He must join the Brotherhood. You got it, boss. With that the man sped away faster than a blur. Harry watched the scene from above and noticed this white-haired teen, Pietro, had a concentration of time energy on his body. Harry figured he could increase time's frame of reference for himself while in motion and move several-fold faster than others while watching the world in slow motion. Harry had no simple way of countering such a person. Some of the anti-magic spells he could once use may have had a dampening effect against the teen's access to time energy, but Harry hadn't had any luck in making another anti-magic spell and he couldn't make more binding equipment that used anti-magic until he could cast such spells. Before Harry could consider further ramifications, the blue-skinned woman, Mystique, shifted back into the form of a raven and took flight. Harry considered following her or getting close and placing a tracking charm on her, but if it turned out she was just flying around looking for him, he'd feel pretty silly following her around. Once she left the area, Harry apparat into the sky above a more populated section of North Salem and flew down into an empty alleyway before shifting back to human form and removing the concealing spells he placed on himself. Harry walked around for a few minutes and eventually spotted the speedy mutant down the street. He allowed himself to be followed into a hotel and walked up to the counter. Harry sensed the bearer of time energy follow him inside and walk over to a coach. Harry visibly took the last quartz crystal from the pouch at his side and kept it in his hand while talking to the woman at the front desk. She stated that Harry wasn't old enough to order a room and Harry used lumos on the crystal held below the desk out of her line of sight, but in Pietro's. He placed it into his inventory and used a simple form of telepathy to make the woman think that an adult was standing next to Harry, showing the right ID and everything needed for a room. She accepted the cash payment and gave Harry a room card, even saying the room number out loud and thanking the man for his time, even though anyone looking would see she was talking to empty space. Thankfully the only one paying attention was the white-haired teen on the couch. Harry thought to himself if these guys needed more hints than that they weren't worth his time. Not long after arriving in his room, Harry took an empty pet carrier out of his inventory. It had a two-way port key that would send itself to Harry's London home and a few minutes later, return to the same spot. Harry used a charm while saying, "Goose, get in and sit tight and this will bring you to me." The charm would make the pet carrier repeat the message upon arrival and with that Harry activated the port key. A few moments later the pet carrier returned and Goose casually walked out. Goose conveyed a question though their link, "What are you getting yourself into this time?" Harry answered the sassy Flurkin back, "I'm going to attend a boarding school filled with mutants. Please don't eat any of them." Goose turned her head up at that and conveyed back, "I don't eat junk food except for special occasions." She jumped up on the bed and got comfortable before sending another question at him, "What kind of mutants?" Harry wondered how many types of mutants Goose was aware of. Goose seemed to know lots about Earth, about magics, and all kinds of things, and it wasn't like she had access to the internet. Or did she? though Harry couldn't imagine his familiar using a computer. He answered, the humankind who have awakened their X gene, hoping they weren't tastier than other kinds of mutants. He would never know, however, since Goose didn't say anything after that. While waiting for the carrier to return, Harry had been setting up several traps and relics. He couldn't make more until he had more spells to use, but the amount he made before that was still in the hundreds, even if they were all prototypes. Harry could also use wizard magic to create things to his heart's content, but doing so would fry the TV inside the room. Harry decided to proceed anyways and compensate the hotel for the TV afterwards. One thing Harry did was place a overpowered diagnostic charm on the door frame, turning it into a scanning type artifact. Since wooden door frames were not an ideal material for such artifacts, it would burn out after a single use, but would give Harry a detailed report of the next fellows who entered. Knock knock. Harry answered the door, and unsurprisingly the white-haired teen was standing there with a stern-looking 30-something looking woman wearing no-nonsense business attire and glasses. Harry asked, yes. Can I help you? The woman spoke up, actually it is I who can help you. Do you mind if we come in? I would like a moment to speak with you. Harry shrugged and said with his clipped British accent, well, I certainly have a moment. Come on in, I suppose. Make yourself comfortable. Harry pulled out the chairs near the desk and dragged them near the bed and sat himself down. Pietro walked into the room first but turned every which way to make sure there was nothing there that could be dangerous. Harry internally laughed at this as the teen completely ignored the flirkin lying on the bed. The traps and relics scattered about all looked like trash, so he didn't pay attention to that either. A moment later the woman entered and closed the door behind her. She turned from the door to face Harry while the surface of her body rolled over in waves, revealing her blue form, while her business attire shifted into something simpler that looked like a white one-piece dress. Harry raised an eyebrow at her and smiled back, you did say to get comfortable. Harry looked thoughtful for a moment before shrugging once more and not paying it any more mind. Neither sat down in the provided chairs, preferring to lean on them while they remained standing. The shapeshifter said, my name is Mystique and this is Pietro, we are from the Brotherhood of Mutants. Harry answered back, acquaintances of the fellows from before? Well, I'm Harry Potter. I don't suppose you're here to fight, are you? Mystique quickly shook her head in the negative and said, no, I'm here to offer you a place in the Brotherhood. A chance to rise above the humans and take your rightful place in the world. Harry suddenly felt another presence within his mind. A telepath had come knocking and entered when he found the front door was open. Harry's mind was available to anyone who wanted to come in but would only allow others to see what he wanted. This person seemed to be borrowing his senses and trying to discern his thoughts on the conversation, but it wasn't from either of the mutants in the room. Harry said, even if that held any interest to me, what could your Brotherhood offer that would help me accomplish it? He had no interest in such a thing, but he was curious about the resources these mutants had to make such an offer. Mystique answered, strength, we will make you stronger. Harry thought, that's it. He looked over at Pietro and asked, and how exactly do you gain strength? The speedster quickly answered, combat training mostly. The more you fight, the better you get at fighting. Harry had a lot to say about that but simply asked, how many times in the last few months have you fought someone or something that was willing to kill you if you lost? Harry waited 5 seconds but there was no reply as the teen seemed to still be thinking it over. Harry asked, then in the last few months, how many different people have you fought who are stronger than you? This time he quickly answered, 6. And lastly Harry asked, and were at least half or more than half of these 6 members of the Brotherhood? He looked like he wanted to answer, but a glance from Mystique rendered him silent as it wasn't an answer they were proud to announce. Harry gave a flat look to Mystique and asked in monotone, so in conclusion, your Brotherhood doesn't have anyone strong enough for you to improve yourself sparring against, and you either challenge others merciful enough not to kill you when you lose or those weaker than you. And you're saying I'll get stronger if I join you? Did I miss anything? Mystique looked rather angry at the logical conclusion and said, yes, do you want to die? Harry gave a knowing smirk to her and confidently said, if you think you have a chance, feel free to try. But there will be no turning back once you do. I'll have you know there isn't a single soul in this world who has tried to kill me and lived to tell about it. I don't give second chances to those who come at me with lethal force, regardless of the fact that it never takes. Harry gave Mystique the same stare he gives to the creatures that spawned during battle meditation. Harry was not a killer, he was a warrior. In combat against someone seeking his life, he would end his opponents. He wouldn't make them suffer, of course. He'd never make someone suffer before killing them. It was that efficiency that made him even more dangerous. Pietro, who wasn't on the receiving end of Harry's hard gaze, said, what the hell? You're immortal. Harry answered, I didn't say that. My power has a lot of applications and with some prior preparation, there is a lot I can do. Mystique realized that her own bluff wasn't going to do anything and understood from his gaze he was not bluffing. Changing the subject she said, the Brotherhood is not weak, but neither are the humans. We must stand together for when the time comes that they turn on us. Harry said, you're making a lot of assumptions there. However, let's skip over all of that for now. I assume you must have seen me fight or heard about my little scuffle with your acquaintances. What did you learn about my power? Pietro answered before she could speak up, let's see, you're strong, pretty fast, though not as fast as me, you can make fire not burn, make chains, make illusions, and teleport. But besides your strength, you need to use rocks for your other powers. Harry said, close enough. I call my power upgrade. I can absorb pure metals or pure gemstones and get short-term boosts, long-term boosts, or momentary access to certain forms of energy. I can also absorb food and use energy from it to recover. If I absorb food in advance, I gain the ability to recover until it has been digested. I'm strong because not long ago I absorbed a lot of platinum and a few hours ago I absorbed a lot of steel. Absorbing gemstones at least the size of an egg give me a moment's worth of access to the other abilities. Both mutants were stunned as neither expected Harry to directly tell them the details of his powers. Harry also thought to himself, fully knowing there was a listener in his head, that he could also absorb books and know their contents perfectly for a few days. Pietro shook his head and once he processed the information he shouted, you're a goddamn premium gamer. Harry froze complete at the term and barely was able to ask, what? Mystique said with annoyance, what are you talking about, Pietro? The speedster pointed at Harry and said, in online games there are bastards who spend lots of real money to get stronger than anyone else. Not because they're better, but because they're richer. They're always topping the leaderboards and leave guys who play with just their skill in the dust. This guy's power is just like that, he can spend money on stuff to unfairly make himself stronger without working for it. Harry sat frozen for 3 full seconds before he burst out into hysterical laughter. He thought Pietro had somehow figured out his true power, but it was that of all things. He could easily keep laughing for a few minutes, but that would be rude to his guests, so he took a few deep breaths to calm himself, though he still had a large smile plastered across his face. Harry said, premium. I like that. I hope you don't mind if I use it in the future. Anyways, if I joined you guys, I wouldn't be able to keep my own source of income and your Brotherhood would have to spend its funds upgrading me. If I go too long without absorbing anything, I'm no different from a very skilled human. Mystique frowned and said, if it is just metals, we can easily grant you with an unlimited supply. Harry noticed Pietro's eyes seemed to widen in some sort of realization. Harry figured he just thought of someone with a mutant ability that could guarantee such a promise. Harry said, well, tabling that for now, there is one last point. Are you confident in the future that there will be no one stronger than the Brotherhood? Mystique said with firm resolution, yes. We are already gathering the strongest mutant dash. Stop, Harry interrupted her. He said, just mutants? She was irked at the interruption and said, yes, we are the Brotherhood of Mutants after all. Harry shook his head and said, then you are wasting your time. If you're only recruiting mutants then you are just looking for a strong mutant. That is because the only way your group could win is if you found a single unbeatable mutant. But even if you actually found such a mutant who shared the same goals, they'd never listen to you, you would have to follow them. I'm sure whoever you currently follow is very powerful, but unless he cannot be defeated by anyone, your goal is meaningless. Strength that is not absolute is not strength. Unless an undefeatable mutant is already a part of the Brotherhood, you can't claim you have strength, which means that in the end, you have nothing. Pietro said, now hold it right there. No one can beat Magneto. Mystique shouted, silence Pietro. Harry shrugged and said, let's end this here. You don't have any means for me to get stronger that I can't use myself. You don't have a source of the resources I need superior to my own. And since your leader isn't already the leader of the world, then he obviously is not undefeatable, which means your goals cannot be achieved without luck. I will not be joining the Brotherhood, so you can show yourselves out. Mystique had watched Harry's fight with the X-Men nearly from start to finish and had heard from Pyro exactly how quick to fight Harry had been. She thought just giving him a chance to fight more would do it, the easiest recruitment ever had by anyone. Instead, he used calm and dispassionate logic to break down her offer piece by piece and show her how worthless it was. She couldn't even counter it because she knew that her boss was not in fact undefeatable and she was in fact looking for unstoppable mutants. She gave him one last glare that seemed about as effective against him as a gentle breeze and said, "You're making a great mistake. If you stand in our way, you won't live to regret it." She had been used to threatening people for so long she had forgotten their earlier conversation, so Harry's response was unexpected for her. Harry smiled and innocently said, "Oh? Is that a promise? Something to look forward to then. I hope you won't disappoint me." Pietro muttered to himself, "Bastard probably paid for extra lives," before saying aloud, "Let's get out of here, Mystique. Without pay to play, this guy's just a loser and he's even crazier than my sister." With that the pair left and Harry felt the presence eavesdropping on his awareness leave as well. He checked the door to see what the diagnostic charm revealed and was more than a little surprised. Pietro was pretty much what he expected. The teen's nerves seemed to channel time energy, which increased his relative perspective of time-space. From a standard point of view, he could think fast, react fast, and move fast. The time energy likely spread out to his muscles, allowing him to move while the world would be slowly moving around him. Mystique was different. Her power existed in every single cell. They could divide and even merge at will. Every cell could practically shift into another cell. She could take the form of any human of any age and likely even take the form of most animals, though he suspected it would be harder for her to take the form of larger animals. What was interesting about her power was the similarities it bore to his own. Harry's cells were all made up of the same energy, and if injured, the excess energy of nearby cells could be used to make cells to replace damaged ones. Mystique's cells were similar in that each cell could potentially turn into any other cells, though it was obvious she had limits. He doubted if her head was removed, she could turn her hand into a head and survive. The similarities, however, were enough to make him wonder though. Harry's mutant power was basically the ability that kept his magic Obscurus particles together in the shape of Harry Potter. But, was that all his mutant power could do? Both the Phoenix Force and Thawne had told him he was capable of far more than just what he knew. The Sorceress Supreme of the future did in fact tell him that he had to start practicing his mutant powers. That meant there was in fact more to his powers than just keeping his form and repairing his form. Knock knock. His musings were interrupted by his next visitor. Visitors as it were. Moreover, one of the people behind the door felt like a powerful sorcerer saturated not with eldritch dimensional energy, but natural energy, as if Mother Nature herself was standing there. Harry answered the door once more and first noticed the one warrior he fought before called Logan standing to the side of a bald middle-aged man in a wheelchair and an African goddess of a woman behind him. She looked to be in her mid to late 20s, but Harry knew that level of saturation of natural energy would inhibit signs of age until she was in her late 60s, so she was likely closer to 50 than she was 20. Harry wasn't interested in older women, but he could appreciate beauty. Harry first turned to Logan and said, "We meet again. I'm sorry if you want a rematch, but I'll have to disappoint. I'm kinda low on strength at the moment unless you have a few pounds of steel laying around." He said, "Maybe later, I'm here because Charles wants a word." Harry said, "Ah, the peeper, so what can I do for you?" The bald man and the woman behind him were both startled at Harry's address of Xavier. The wheelchair-bound man asked, "I'm sorry, but what do you mean by that?" Harry said, "Well, you were the one peeping on my thoughts during my earlier conversation, right? I'm a pretty open guy so I don't mind, but since you didn't ask permission to borrow my senses, you were peeping, thus, you are a peeper." Logan chuckled, which caused the woman to slap his shoulder. This caused him to chuckle more. The bald man sighed and said, "I apologize for intruding on your mind. When I learned we were not the first to arrive and speak with you, I was very concerned. Mystique's unique physiology prevents me from reading her thoughts, and young Maximov's thoughts run at a speed that is difficult to comprehend. I allowed my curiosity to get the better of me and I ask your forgiveness, it won't happen again." Harry shrugged, "If you say so. You probably already know this, but I'm Harry Potter, come on in. That's Goose, by the way." He motioned at the Flurkin, who had been amused by the previous guests and seemed to hope the next ones would be just as amusing. Harry wasn't worried about telepaths. When Harry had the Darkhold and Book of Vishanti in his inventory after getting his psionic path and had paused, he reformatted his mind completely and then sealed the memories and knowledge of how he did it. He had no idea how long he must have spent using psionics and whatever he found in those books combined with a clemency to do it, but his mind had several nearly flawless defenses. If a telepath entered the mental plane that was Harry's mind, they would find a massive library. Thoughts Harry allowed to do so would echo through the halls, allowing those within to hear the thoughts he allowed them to hear. All of Harry's knowledge was organized into the book, so someone looking for something specific would have trouble finding it, as they would have to find the specific book. It wasn't possible to just enter his mind and find his memories or knowledge. and the books numbered in the thousands. That, however, was nothing compared to the mental attacks Harry somehow prepared during that time. When needed, Harry could cause perfect replicas of the thousands of different monsters Harry had encountered through his battle meditation to fill his library. He could send them to attack the minds of other telepaths or have them destroy weaker intruders or harass stronger ones, preventing them from finding the book and page containing the knowledge they wanted from Harry. There was even an automated security function that would automatically dispatch the hordes of monsters within Harry's mind if a book was taken from the shelf and not read in a designated reading area. That way, if someone did sneak inside without him knowing, or if he was incapacitated and unable to activate his defense, it would activate anyways. And last, the super secret knowledge such as the dangerous magic from the Masters section of Kamartaj's library and stuff he found in the magic tomes of Hogwarts, the Black Library, and Salazar's private study were all hidden in folded space within Harry's mind. Should the space be unfolded, the library would become a massive maze and the monsters would automatically fill the maze. As for the knowledge of the Darkhold and Book of Vishanti, even Harry had no idea where it was and he knew better than to try and look for it. The knowledge of what he did to his mind and how he did it was also locked up with those books as well. A moment after the trio entered, the telepath said, "I am Professor Charles Xavier. This is Logan and Aurora Monroe, also known as Wolverine and Storm." Harry recognized the name as the teacher of Ileana Rasputin and took another look at her. Harry said, "Storm, huh? I'm guessing weather powers. You wouldn't happen to be descended from a long line of Kenyan priestesses with white hair going back thousands of years, would you?" Shocked recognition flashed before her eyes before she asked, "How could you possibly know that?" The curtains moved in the room despite the window being closed as the natural energy passively radiating off the woman reacted to her emotion. Harry looked back at the curtains to make it clear he noticed this and said, "Many aspects of my abilities revolve around what can be considered magic. I've learned more about magic than anyone you'll likely ever meet and have read a staggering number of books on the subject. One such book was written by a powerful sorceress who was once a priestess of a tribe and well known for their white hair priestesses, which had only a single line. You are likely her descendant." The book contained her own experiences with magic, especially weather magic, and everything she learned about it. I remember the book describing how easily passive emotions affected her power when casting, but it also described a practice she used to separate her emotions from her magic. Charles and Aurora were both shocked at this and Logan asked, "Where is that book?" "If it can help Aurora, I'll do whatever it takes to get it." Aurora looked sweetly back at Logan and Harry could tell there was something between the two. Harry answered, "The one who owns the book is very reasonable. As her descendant, the book should go to Ms. Monroe anyways, so I should be able to get it. I can request it be shipped here and get it to you within a week." The book Harry referred to was indeed what he claimed and in fact had been written by someone who was likely this woman's ancestor. She was also a former Sorcerer Supreme and her book was in the Masters section of Kamartaj's library. It was one of the better ones on experiences dealing with natural energy and wind and weather magic. It also came with a caveat that it could be reclaimed by the tribe it originated from at any time, though they had likely forgotten about it. Xavier was startled at the easy admission of the existence of magic. He said, "If it isn't too much trouble, would you mind displaying some magic?" Harry took out his last smoky quartz from the pouch at his side and had it glow for a moment before sliding it into his inventory. He then turned an unused chair into a large pig. The group stared at the pig who stared back and oinked. A moment later it turned back into a chair since Harry didn't use much magic on the spell. Xavier recovered from his shock the quickest and said, "Thank you, Harry, that was most enlightening. If you do know the location of such a book that can help Aurora, it would mean a great deal to us for her to obtain it. Now, although you've heard it before, I'd like to make you an offer as well. I was hoping you could join my institute. It is a boarding school for young mutants such as yourself." "Exactly how much about me do you know? You were in my head after all." "Yes, but other than surface thoughts, there wasn't a single stray memory or idea out of place. I can easily admit yours is the most organized mind I have ever seen. As the information wasn't needed to view your conversation with Mystique, I didn't access it, so I know next to nothing about you that you yourself have told us or told Mystique." Harry knew that of course, as his mind's defenses hadn't activated, meaning Charles hadn't taken a book off the shelf and tried to read it. He said, "All right then, I'll give you the basics. I was born in the UK and I turned 15 on July 31st. My mutation awoke a week before my 10th birthday when an accident happened which killed my relatives, and I wouldn't be alive if it hadn't awoken at the time. I spent the next several months and years traveling and learning much about my power. I am very smart and paid some people to make it look like I've been in school all this time, though I can test out if needed whenever I want to. I moved to New York today and got my US citizenship properly. I'm also rich, but that's another story. Xavier said, I'm sorry about your relatives. So you've been alone this whole time? Harry blankly said, don't be sorry about them. He got out a quartz crystal from his pocket, though it was from his inventory. He used up the 3 he put in his pouch, but they didn't know that, so it didn't matter. He made it glow for a moment before setting back into his inventory. He then took the book from his mind that had his memories of growing up with the Dursleys and copied it before sending the highlights to Xavier. Unlike Jean, the experienced telepath could have blocked the incoming transmission, but he did not. A moment later he wished he did. Charles went over the details, however, as it was something a teacher like himself needed in order to help his student. What he stood out the most was their hatred of him for what he was, their obvious lies about his parents, and the fact that they only called him freak or boy. Charles said, Harry, I believe your mother might have been a mutant. Harry pretended to be shocked while inwardly snickering. There was no good way to fake memories even for magic users, so he could only show him real ones. He already guessed that the professor would make that conclusion, and it was logical considering the facts he knew and his prior experience. He said thoughtfully, maybe. Well, in answer to your other question, for the last 3 years I've had a teacher who was basically a mystic monk. I learned many things, including how to fight properly, and it was only a few months ago I was told there was nothing more I could learn without leaving on my own. And you decided to move to New York? Well, I do hope I can help you achieve your goals. If you are not against such an idea, I'd like to invite you over to the Institute tomorrow and give you a tour. For many mutants, the Institute is their only home, but although that does not seem to be the case for you, I still think you can find yourself a home there with others such as yourself. Harry smiled and said, your pitch certainly sounds nicer than Mystique's did. Alright, you have a deal. I'll show up tomorrow, and if I like what I see, I'll stay. Goose meowed from the bed. Harry said, is there anyone allergic to cats there? If Goose can't come with me, that's kind of a deal breaker. Logan chuckled, no, we've got stranger things than cats at the mansion. Harry wondered about that. Something to look forward to. The trio said their goodbyes and left the hotel. Harry figured that was a pretty good display of magic along with psionics, so all he had to do was accept the invite. He wondered what he would get for a quest reward this time. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.